Module 2, Purposes for Assessment. People most often use language assessments to collect two kinds of data. One is connected with the learning of languages, with assessing the degree of progress towards a learning goal. These purposes are important in schools or other educational settings, and so the assessments used to collect the data come under the heading of educational assessment. Educational language assessment usually takes place within language programs. The producers are usually based on content that has been or will be taught, are frequently developed and carried out by teachers, and can often be flexible, allowing for the use of observational techniques, watching and recording what learning do, portfolios, collections of learning work. Self-assessment, making judges about their own abilities, and informal tests or quizzes, as well as formal tests administered under more strictly controlled conditions. The second kind of information is connected with whether or not a person's language ability is adequate to satisfy some predetermined need or standard. This is known as proficiency assessment. The assessment of language proficiency is usually connected to the language assessment of language. Proficiency is usually connected to the language and related skills that are needed to carry out a job, study an academic subject, or fulfill other kind of role, because the focus is not on what the assessed has been taught. This kind of assessment is less likely to be carried out by teachers, and more likely to involve formal tests administered under control, uniform, standardized conditions, and produced by national or international agencies. Proficiency assessments are distinct from educational assessments because they do not center on learning processes or the outcomes of particular course of study. Proficiency assessments are connected with a person's current functionality rather than with their learning what the assessee can accomplish through their use of language now, not how they reach this point or how long it might take them to arrive at a higher level of ability. In proficiency assessment, the issue is whether or not the person being assessed has sufficient language ability to satisfy certain needs. Proficiency assessments are often used to gatekeeping decisions, immigrations, access to employment, and educational opportunities. This may relate to a relatively specific purpose, such as using the language in leading groups of tourists around a city, working as a dentist, steering ships in international water, or studying marketing at a university. Or it may be for less specialized around the or less clearing definable general purposes that might apply to a very wide range of language users. Tasks that many language users might need to carry out of some points might include reserving a room in a hotel or guest house, filling in form with basic personal information, buying food, following television news programs, reading articles in popular magazines, or holding conversations about personal experiences. Educational assessment in teaching and learning. Assessment can take place at different stages during the learning process. Before they begin a course in a new language, we may be interested in the learner's aptitude for language learning, their potential to learn, although we know that almost anyone can learn a foreign language. Given the time and motivation, some people may be predisposed to make faster progress than others. A sports coach looking for someone with the potential to be a good basketball player may try to find someone who is tall and able to jump high. With quick reactions, good coordinations, and competitive spirit. In the same way, some selective language training programs, such as those organized by the military, need to pick from a large group of applicants, those with the greatest potential to learn a language quickly. The Pimsleur Language Aptitude Battery, Pimsleur et al. 2004. For example, set out to identify as potential language learners individuals with a good memory for word shapes and sound who are good at discriminating between similar sounds, good at identifying grammatical patterns, and who have an interest in other cultures. Partly because motivation is now widely regarded as more important than aptitude. In shaping language learning success, and partly because most language courses cater for learners who already have some knowledge of language. Aptitude tests are not as widely used as they used to be. It is more often the case that course providers wish to find out how much of the content of the course language learners already know before they begin, or how much they have learned by the end, in this case assessment. Maybe prognostic, looking forward to the content plan for the course and deciding on priorities, or concerned with achievement, looking back to what the learners have been taught, to find out how much they have observed and which might need to be covered again. Aptitude and prognostic assessment are used to inform selection decisions. Deciding which learners might require language courses, or choosing those most likely to succeed. They may also be used to inform placement decisions about which of the available classes best matches each learner's needs. During a course achievements, assessments as progress tests might be used to call the ongoing improvement made by learners at the end of a course as exit rest. They are often used in making pass or fail decisions or in assigning grades. In using achievement assessments, the teachers may be interested in obtaining detailed diagnostic information about which parts of the material the learners have taken in and which parts will need more work. In assessing learning, a distinction is often made between more formative uses of assessment that immediately guide what teachers and learners will do next, and more summative tests, which focus on a retrospective picture of what have been learned. Another way of expressing these distinctions is to call the former assessment for learning and to contrast this with assessment of learning. Black and William 1998, in other words in Wiggins. 1998 term summative assessments Oden's learning. Formative assessment informed it. An example of the use of formative and diagnostic assessment would be a teacher observing that some students are having difficulty in distinguishing between for and since. When talking about time in English, the teacher might decide to intervene by asking questions and providing examples to help build their understanding of the distinction. This kind of assessments informs learning because the teacher is able to adjust the content of her classes to take account of the student's performance. The focus is on what should happen next in the classroom to bring about learning. Task 2.2. Look at this extract from a job advertisement placed by the British government. What kind of language assessment do you think they might use in selecting sustainable people for the job? You won't need any specific language skills for a career in the Foreign Office, although they certainly be an advantage in your career. Where an overseas position requires language skills, you receive intensive tuition to get you up to the right level. So if you need to speak fluent Russian for a press and public affairs role in the British Embassy, Moscow will make sure that the full-time language training is in place for you. An example of a more summative assessment would be an end-of-year test based on the topics taught during the year. The test audits learning by providing evidence of what the students have learned and how well they have met the course objectives. The focus is on finding out much learning has happened, like the formative assessment described above. Such a test might include questions dealing with specific points of grammar, such as the for or since distinction found in the diagnostic test. But the results may not be available until the school year has finished and there is no immediate opportunity to work or improving performance as all the student has left. In this case, the results might be used for program evaluation or judgments about the effectiveness of the language course rather than on abilities of individual learners. Gaining an awareness of how well the learners are progressing is of course easiest when the learners are also involved and interested in the process and share their insights with their teacher. Good learners set themselves targets, think about how best to learn, trying out and evaluating new techniques, and often reflect on their own progress towards their goals. Self-assessment and peer assessment, in which learners assess their own and each other's performance, have emerged as powerful means of engaging learners in the test processes and helping them to take more control of their own language. Of course, teaching can become more challenging when the learners do not want to learn or are unwilling to communicate. This brings us to another reason for using assessment motivating learners, because assessments are often associated with reward access to opportunities such as courses or jobs, prizes, certificate, grades, praise, and attention from the teacher. They can serve as a powerful motivation for learners. However, using assessment in this way is risky and potentially very damaging. In some cases, it can actually have a negative effect on a learner's motivation. The learner who repeatedly fails to gain good grades or pass tests will sooner or later become frustrated, conclude that language learning is not worth the effort, and give up even trying to learn. Formative diagnostic assessment, by providing helpful feedback, information about performance that can show the learner what he or she needs to do in order to improve, promises to guide learners in their studies. However, for many learners, especially those in formal schooling, success on tests, especially major proficiency tests, may come to seem more important than successful communication in the language they are learning. Where this happens, the content of the test can take over from the official curriculum, and learning goals that are not covered on the test may get pushed aside and ignored. Teachers may teach and students may try to learn only the material that they think will be assessed. The changes in teaching and learning that may come about in response to an upcoming test are known as washback, and this has emerged as an important area of language assessment. Research, feedback, and washback are discussed in more detail in Module 4. Educational assessment, on the one hand, particularly formative assessment, and proficiency assessment, on the other, are often seen as distinct, even incompatible areas of specialization, conducted by different people employing different techniques informed by different theories, and embracing different values. For this reason, they are often treated separately, and the relationship between them ranges from mutual indifference to sometimes heated conflict. This conflict is most often played out in the field of summative assessment, where the role of the teacher as the facilitator of learning. The word of formative assessment comes up against the need to account for what has been learned in terms of the general standards set by employers, governments, or other internal agencies. The words of summative assessment and proficiency assessment. Although the differences between what teachers do in the classroom and large-scale testing are important, there is also a good deal in common between them. To be effective, both depend above all on well-crafted questions or other techniques that will provide useful evidence of learners' abilities. Task type used in large-scale tests can be adapted for use in the classroom, while innovative ideas first tired out in class can find their way into more formal assessments. Both classroom assessments and large-scale tests can be improved by careful and critical review, and through experience the results from assessment of one occasions inevitably point to improvements to be made the next time it is used. Achieving good quality in both requires collective and systematic efforts. Ways of checking and improving language assessments are described in Module 3 and 4. Perhaps the strongest argument for treating assessment in the classroom and in the examination hall in the same book is that in a healthy educational system, both should work together. If teachers understand how tests work, they will be more effective at preparing their students to the examinations. On the other hand, as Alderson 1999 remarks, testing is too important to be left to testers. It is essential that educational tests should reflect the curriculum and the needs and interests of learners. Teachers are familiar with their learners and with the reality of how the curriculum is delivered in practice. They are therefore well placed to judge the content of tests and to hold the test makers to account.